Hello, this is the 17th module, second lecture. I'm going to talk to you about Transcendentalism and Walt Whitman. The Transcendentalist movement emerged in America in the 19th century in the region called New England. New England is in the northeast part of America, this part. And it contains regions like Salem, Massachusetts, Concord. The important figures in Transcendentalism were Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, and also Walt Whitman. The Transcendentalists were very optimistic. They believed in the greatness of the human life and the human being. And it was a reaction against 18th century rationalism, neoclassicism, and the movement was based in the belief that the whole world is united with God, with nature. The unity of human life with God and nature, that is very central in Transcendentalism. He believes that God is ever present in nature, omnipresent. And they believe that we should learn directly from nature, not from books, but learn directly from nature. Their understanding of God was influenced by Eastern philosophies like Indian philosophy, and they developed the concept of Oversoul or the Paramatma. And every human being is a microcosm or a reflection of the Paramatma, a Jivatma. So the concept of Oversoul is important, and human being as an expression of divinity is important, because this eventually led to the ideas of self-reliance and individualism, which are very important building blocks of American culture itself. The Transcendentalists caught the mood of America, the optimistic mood of America. That is why they became so popular. Now, American Transcendentalists were centered in the place called Concord. That is where Thoreau was born. That is where Emerson came and settled down. The Transcendental Club was organized in 1836, the year in which Emerson's seminal essay, Nature, was published, 1836. Incidentally, that is the year in which Charles Dickens in England started publishing the Pickwick Papers. Other members of the Transcendental movement, I only mentioned Emerson, Thoreau, and Whitman. Other members were Amos Bronson Alcott. He was the man who gave the Transcendentalist journal The Dial its title. The journal The Dial refers to the sundial. And it was edited by, for 2 years, it was edited by Margaret Fuller, another member of the Transcendental movement. It was from 1840 to 1844 that the Transcendental movement flourished. E.W. Channing was another important member. It was from 1840 to 1844 that the Dial was published. That is what I meant. I said that in that period, the Transcendental movement flourished. That's not what I meant. From 1840 to 44, the Dial, their journal, was published. The first 2 years, Margaret Fuller was the editor. Then, what are the features of Transcendentalism? Transcendentalism drew inspiration from English and German Romanticism, from Hindu and Buddhist thoughts, Zen Buddhism, and from the tenets of Confucius and Mencius, Chinese philosophers. Transcendentalism was a response to the changing American culture of the time. America was coming of coming of its own. It was getting established Americanness, and the Transcendentalists greatly contributed to this American consciousness or American culture. Transcendentalism was started by Emerson, who was a Unitarian minister and a lecturer at that time, and he came and settled down in Concord. He was from Massachusetts, and he was beginning to write, the writings which laid the foundations of the movement. He wrote in a very personal, conversational style, and asserted in all his essays that America is the torchbearer of human history. The Americans are torchbearers of human history. This idea laid the foundations of the American dream. The idea that Americans can be on the top of the world, that they can attain what they want, they can fulfill their dreams. That American dream was rooted in Emersonian thought. Emerson laid the foundations of a self-culture movement. The individuals can depend on themselves and learn the values and truths of life from nature, from their own experience. Depend on yourself. Know thyself. These are important aspects of the self-culture movement. As I told you, they also asserted, Emerson and others also asserted that we should have self-reliance. We should depend on ourselves, walk on our own feet. We will work with our own hands. We will speak our own minds. This is a quotation from Emerson. Nature, the long prose essay published in 1836, laid the foundations of Transcendentalism, and he talks about the various aspects of nature. Nature is useful to us in many different ways, in 4 different ways, in fact. Nature gives us commodities or objects that we use. Mangoes, flowers that we can put in our hair. So nature gives us commodities. Nature also gives us beauty. Nature gives us a sense of appreciation of beauty. Nature gives us our aesthetic purpose in life. Nature also gives us a simple language to speak in. Wordsworth very famously talked about that language in preface to lyrical ballads. And nature also gives us a discipline. You follow the seasons, you follow the festivals that follow the seasons, you follow native food styles. That will give you a discipline in life. Emerson was a poet, and he wrote poetry also, apart from essays. His major essays are Nature, The American Scholar, Self-Reliance, etc. And he also wrote poetry such as Brahma. Talking about Oversoul, I have to mention Brahma, where he talks about that godly power that is above us, of which we are all expressions. Emerson, at that time when he wrote Brahma, was studying the work of Victor Cousin. Victor Cousin is a name associated with aestheticism and Hindu philosophy. The American Scholar is a very major essay by Emerson, which was originally a lecture given at Phi Beta Kappa Society. That is an intellectual society in America. Here he presents an ideal picture of intellectual life in America, and he advocates that the intellectual should turn into man thinking. Reason he should assert and learn directly for himself. This led to the essay Self-Reliance, published in 1841, which is a definitive statement of Emerson's transcendentalist philosophy, where he says, in Self-Reliance, he says that we should follow our own instincts and ideas and trust ourselves. Trust thyself was a motto. The Oversoul, Politics, Representative Men, etc. are other works by Emerson. Next, I'll talk to you about Henry David Thoreau. Thoreau was born in 1817 in Concord in Massachusetts, and he was a devoted abolitionist. He wrote transcendentalist essays inspired by Emerson, and he is well known for an experiment that he did in life. He went and lived near Walden Pond all by himself without the help of anybody else. And this life in solitude he documents in the book Walden, or Life in the Woods, published from 1845, based on his life from 1845 to 1847. It was in 1854 that this book was published. While he lived at Walden, Thoreau refused to pay a tax levied by the government because he did not want to support a government that supported slavery. And based on this denial of tax, he wrote Civil Disobedience. I am checking whether my phone is ringing. It looks like it's ringing. Don't worry, we are not looking at the phone now. Civil Disobedience was published in 1849. And the main idea is that the government should not interfere in the life of the people. That government is best that governs the least. This is an idea that even now remains very relevant. Next, we have to talk about Walt Whitman, 1819 to 1892. Walt Whitman was one of the greatest of American writers, inspired by Emerson. He was not directly a transcendentalist, but there are a lot of transcendentalist ideas in his works. The collection of Whitman's poetry, there is only one collection, that is Leaves of Grass, that appeared in several editions. The title, The Leaves of Grass, was taken from Emerson's essay called The Poet. Leaves of Grass is an ironic title. In the one hand, it means the leaves of grass or the blades of grass, which is a representation of what is common in life, common man. Leaves of Grass also means inferior poetic writings. In Leaves of Grass, there are many important poems such as Song of Myself, When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed, etc., which are expressions of individualism, democracy. Whitman stood for individualism and democracy. Whitman asserted the oneness of humanity in poems like Crossing Brooklyn Ferry and Out of the Cradle Endlessly Rocking. Out of the Cradle Endlessly Rocking is also a poem that talks about the birth of the poet. A little boy, the poet is a little boy. He is touched by the death of a bird at Paumanok Beach, Long Island, that is Paumanok, near New York. And he thinks about what is the reason for suffering in life. And the sea, the ever-rocking cradle of the sea, gives him the word death. Then When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed, which I already mentioned, is one of his many elegies for Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln had abolished slavery. He stood for republicanism, and Walt Whitman was greatly inspired by him. Another very famous poem that is an elegy for Abraham Lincoln is O Captain, My Captain. During the time of the Transcendentalists, there were other poets like Brahmin poets and fireside poets, including H.W. Longfellow, William Cullen Bryant. They are a very important group, but I think I'll talk to you about them in another lecture. That brings us to the end of this lecture on Transcendentalism and Whitman. Thank you.